CBS Young and the Restless spoilers. Nick Newman had reached a point of certainty so absolute that it pulsed through him like adrenaline, not because the situation was stable, but because he had crossed the threshold where doubt no longer existed for him, not for the family name he carried, not for the life he was trying to save. And ironically, Matt Clark felt the exact same certainty. It was the one trait the two men shared in this hellish confrontation, an unwavering belief that each of them held the upper hand. Nick believed he had finally forced Matt into a corner tight enough to reveal the truth, while Matt clung to the twisted confidence of a man who had already reinvented himself once, survived the impossible, and returned to destroy the man he still blamed for every failure in his life. Somewhere between fists, restraints, and broken breaths, Nick had managed to push Matt into acknowledging his real identity, dragging the truth out from the fog of lies, disguises, aliases, and surgical reinventions that had allowed him to disappear from Genoa City and re-emerge decades later as something unrecognizable. The admission spoken more in rage than remorse sent a ripple through the entire confrontation. In a universe as layered as Genoa City, where history blurred into reinvention and truth could be manipulated by surgical precision, the question of identity had become a phantom that haunted every beat of the story. Fans watching knew that the question wasn't just whether Matt was truly mad, it was whether Nick, Sharon, and Victor were right to trust their instincts, or whether they were chasing a ghost wearing the right eyes in the wrong face. Nearly 25 years had passed since the audience had last seen Matt in the flesh. The version who returned to torment them in the 1990s had already undergone a surgical transformation when the character first reappeared, masquerading as Carter Mills after Eddie Cibrian's original portrayal. Rick Hurst took the role next, and the face fans recognized as Matt became the product of a reconstructive storyline layered into the narrative to justify his unrecognizable appearance. Back then, the motivation for his new identity had been revengey, carefully orchestrated plot designed to frame Nick for murder and destroy the Newman family from the inside out. That revenge arc had been born from obsession, humiliation, and a narcissistic drive to reclaim power after his fall from grace. But this new version of Mathis' version played by Roger Howarth presented a new puzzle. His face was different, his energy was different, and the time gap was large enough that even the most devoted viewers had to pause and ask, was this truly Matt Clark reborn once again? Or a new man wearing the legend's shadow? In the storyline's world, Sharon Newman had been the first to verbalize the impossible. Standing outside the shadow room, bumping into him by chance, Fate claimed she recognized him instantly by his eyes. Eyes that held the same cold calculation, the same buried cruelty, the same flicker of something she remembered from the darkest chapters of her past. She didn't question how the face had changed. She didn't need to. She recognized a soul behind the stare, and that recognition was enough to ignite the terror she thought she had buried forever. It implied that yes, Matt Clark had undergone yet another round of reconstructive surgery, perhaps even more extensive than the first, reshaping himself into a new man with an old vendetta. Or it implied something more sinister, that trauma had blurred Sharon's clarity, merging memory with instinct, and her recognition was an emotional echo rather than a physical match. The show was asking viewers once again to suspend disbelief, to step into a world where identity was fluid, where the human face could be rewritten as easily as history, and where revenge could survive decades in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Nick, however, didn't have the luxury of indulging doubt. Whether this man was Matt Clark reborn or a twisted mimic, the threat was real, tangible, and choking the breath out of Sienna Bacall. Everything he had seen, manipulation, the drugs, the violence, the abduction, the cold precision with which Matt had broken down Sienna's autonomic comfort at the monster he faced, was the same one who once tried to tear apart his life. Nick had cornered him physically, mentally, and emotionally, using force, pressure, and strategy until Matt finally snapped and let the name slip. But even then the question lingered in the back of Nick's pounding skull. Was the confession a victory or a manipulation meant to control the narrative? Because Matt Clark existed in a realm of psychological warfare where truth and lies served the same purpose, power. Victor Newman, for his part, had no patience for philosophical questions about identity. To him, it didn't matter how many surgeries Matt had undergone, how many faces he had worn, or how many decades had passed. He recognized patterns, behavior, intent signature of a predator who believed he could outmaneuver the Newmans. Victor didn't care if the face in front of him belonged to Matt Clark, Carter Mills, or a man who had reinvented himself 100 times over. What mattered was that this man had targeted his family, threatened Sharon and Noah, manipulated Sienna, humiliated Nick, and dared to resurface in Genoa City with the arrogance of someone who believed himself invincible. And Victor, who had built an empire by crushing men exactly like this, had no intention of letting him escape the consequences again. Yet the irony of it all was this. While Victor, Nick, and Sharon believed they had cornered Matt, Matt believed the same thing about them. His confidence didn't falter, even as he sat in restraints, even as Nick tightened control around every angle. He had survived reinvention once. He had reinvented himself twice. He believed that the second face he had built through surgery had served him well enough to fool the world, and that a third iteration of this new mask he wore made him untouchable. In his mind, the fact that he had returned after so long, undetected and unchallenged, proved that he could do it again. No matter how battered he was, no matter how badly his plan had collapsed, he believed there was still a way out, still one more twist, still one more reinvention left in him. What no one realized yet was this. His confidence wasn't just arrogancy, it was a warning. Because a man who had already altered his face, identity, and fate twice had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind of enemy. Sharon Newman had long since accepted that motherhood, especially in Genoa City, came with limits that no amount of love, instinct, or sacrifice could erase. There was a time when Noah was small enough that she could physically pick him up and carry him away from danger. A time when her word was law and her arms were enough to shield him from the ugliness of the world. Those days were gone. The man pacing across her cabin now was not a teenager testing boundaries, but someone closing in on 30 with a lifetime of heartbreak, mistakes, and half-healed scars of his own. His face had changed over the years, his mannerisms slightly different as new actors stepped into his skin and time did its work on his posture, his voice, his energy. But beneath all the cosmetic noise, he was still her firstborn, a man who now carried his own agency, his own capacity to choose badly, to love recklessly, and to walk into danger with his eyes wide open. Sharon could stand in front of the door. She could remind him of the plan. She could ask him to trust Nick and Victor. But she could not reach inside his chest and turn off the part of him that was willing to risk everything for the woman he loved. Her maternal instinct demanded she try. Reality reminded her she could only hold him back for so long. Matt Clarkerburn, under the alias Mitch Bacall in Sienna's world, had an almost obscene clarity about what Sienna wanted in men. He took a cruel kind of satisfaction in noting that she gravitated toward younger men with soft edges and untested hearts, men who made her feel powerful, wanted, and seen in ways her marriage never really had. He treated this as a reflection of her vanity, her appetite, her so-called lack of loyalty, but the truth was uglier and more complicated. His comment about her taste in younger men carried a sinister undertone because it came from a man whose history as an attacker overshadowed any accusation he hurled at her. Matt's darkness predated Sienna's affairs. His cruelty was not born from her betrayal but from a core rot that had been there long before she even knew his name. Sienna's pattern of infidelity, her affairs with men like Noah, became easy tools for him to weaponize, convenient hooks for him to hang his narrative of betrayal on. Yet in the broader frame of the story, those affairs were symptoms of a woman starved for safety and affection, not the cause of the brutality she endured. The show wove this delicate thread with unsettling precision. While Sienna's choices were messy, human, and morally gray, Matt's were predatory and calculated. His past as a man who drugged, manipulated, and violated women could never be overshadowed by any cheating storyline, no matter how salacious. Noah's love for Sienna existed at the crossroads of all of this. It was the kind of reckless, aching devotion that daytime drama thrives on. A man in his 30s who wore his heart as if he were still 19. Who loved like he hadn't spent years watching his parents bleed from loving the wrong people too hard for too long. Sharon's fear wasn't that Noah was immoral or foolish. It was that he was willing to bleed in exactly the same way. The cabin that Nick and Sharon had chosen as a safe house became a symbol of that tension. To Sharon, it was shelter, a buffer against a predator still at large. To Noah, it was a prison that held him back while Sienna's woman he couldn't let go of was somewhere out there, drugged, moved, handled by the same hands that once left Sharon shattered. Every board in the walls, every lock on the door, seemed to whisper that he was failing her simply by staying put. Sharon could counsel him, explain that his survival mattered too, that he couldn't save Sienna by running headfirst into a trap. But Noah's mind kept drifting back to the memory of the first time he fell in love, as an adult on screen, with Ali Abbott Nien. Ali represented a very different version of Noah, a quieter chapter where his heart had room to hope instead of fear, where family legacy and romance wove together gently instead of combusting. He had loved Ali in a way that was idealistic, almost pure. That relationship, now a memory buried under layers of recasts and rewrites, still lived on in the audience's minds. A reminder of who Noah used to be before Sienna and before Matt tore open old wounds in new ways. The current Noah Adams incarnation felt like an echo of that earlier version, laced with more grit, more urgency, more willingness to wade into darkness on someone else's behalf. The show didn't offer a plastic surgery explanation for his new face. It simply expected viewers to accept the transition, as they had done many times before. Noah had been played by a carousel of performers since his birth in 1997, including multiple child actors and now adult ones. And yet the core of the character endured. He was Sharon and Nick's firstborn, the one who often carried the emotional brunt of their mistakes and the legacy of their love story. That meta layer where recasts and continuity blur with character psychology gave the current storyline a strange richness. When Matt sneered about Sienna's taste in younger men, the line resonated both in and out of universe. It was filtered through a character whose face had itself been rewritten through surgery and recasting. A man whose entire existence depended on the audience accepting that the soul of Matt Clark could inhabit multiple bodies. The show asked viewers once again to suspend disbelief, to accept Haworth, famous from General Hospital, as the same Matt who once framed Nick for murder, and to accept Adams as Noah's latest face without any in-world surgical explanation. It was an intricate dance between narrative necessity and audience loyalty. Haworth's arrival as Matt felt like a stunt casting with teeth, a short, explosive arc meant to destabilize the Newmans, dredge up history, and then burn out either through arrest, death, or disappearance from Genoa City. Bacall, by contrast, had the quiet stability of a daytime veteran who could be woven deeper into the long-term fabric of the show. The future seemed to hinge on one central question: would Sienna survive long enough to be part of that long-term fabric? The script teased both possibilities with equal cruelty. On one hand, there was the dark, annoying fear that she might meet a grim, final fate at Matt's hands, another woman swallowed by the pattern of his violence. On the other, there was the hope that she would be freed from his grip and reunited with Noah, not as a neat romantic reward, but as a battered, complicated new beginning that both of them would have to fight to deserve. Sharon, watching her son's desperation, understood that no maternal instinct could sever the bond forming between Noah and Sienna, not now. Not after everything they had endured because of the same man who once tore her own life apart. All Sharon could do was stand in the place where love and fear intersected and trust that her son's heart, blooded as it might be, knew how to choose the right side of the line. Around them, the larger machinery of the Newman family moved with the same implacable force it always had. Victor and Nick were orchestrating dangerous plans, pushing back against a man whose hunger for revenge had survived phase changes, decades, and near-death defeats. The stakes were not just emotional, they were existential. Every time someone bet against the Newmans, whether it was Matt in the 90s or in the present, or any villain in the years between the story eventually proved that underestimating them was a fatal miscalculation. The audience knew this in their bones. No matter how clever the enemy, no matter how intricate the trap, no matter how many actors stepped into the roles of Nick, Noah, or Matt, the family core remained a force that bent fate around it. The climax of this arc was coming fast, closing in like thunder, and every threat from Sharon's limited power as a mother, to Noah's inability to stay in the cabin, to Sienna's fight to break free, to Matt's twisted pride in his own monstrousness was tightening toward the same point of impact. And if history had taught Genoa City anything, it was this. You could doubt a lot of things in this town, but betting against the Newmans, especially when their family was under attack, was the surest way to lose everything.